Hello and welcome back to our pivot table tutorials. In this video, we will quickly orient you to our sample data file and cover how to prepare and format your data for use with pivot tables. Okay, let's cover a few housekeeping items. Throughout this video series, we're going to be using this sample Excel data file, which you can find under the resources section for this module. This sample data file contains fake child level data that you might see related to child outcomes. And this data is already in an Excel workbook format. Now, if your data are not in a delimited format currently, you will need to convert it to a delimited format, meaning each of the data elements should be separated into separate columns like you see in the sample data set on the screen. Your child outcomes data may very well look a bit different. You might, for example, have different fields or different option sets, and that's okay. Also, as noted earlier, the look and feel of Excel may vary from what you see on this screen, depending on which version of Excel you are running on your computer. And you may need to do a little bit of Googling to find exactly where some features are, but for the most part, the layouts are rather similar across recent versions of Excel. Now that we've got those housekeeping items out of the way, let's take a closer look at steps to help you prepare your data set for use with pivot tables. Now, one of the very first things I recommend before you even touch the data up above itself is to simply rename the worksheet. Your data might typically come in, especially if it's extracted from a database, it might come in with some very neutral, generic sounding reference on the worksheet name. I'm going to rename this to something as simple as source data. And what that does is it gives us an easy visual cue for the source records. The benefit of this will become more apparent as you add new worksheets for multiple pivot tables down the road. The next step is to perform a series of high-level inspections broadly across your data set to make sure that they look okay and that it passes what I'd like to call the smell test. You know those situations where you've got 5-day-old lunch meat and you turn to your partner and you say, is this still good? Does this smell right? That's kind of what we're looking for here is, do the data look good overall? And want to make sure that they look good from the beginning. Now, one of the first things you can do to meet that end is to sort your data on something logical. I'm going to pick birth date in this case, and we can use the sort and filter feature on the Home tab and sort it from A to Z. And this will sort it sequentially in order from the oldest birth date to the newest birth date. And I can see that I've got birth dates ranging from about July of 2015 to all the way at the bottom here down to October of 2017. And I know from working with experience in this data set that that's about what I was expecting. The next thing you can look for is simply the total number of records in your data set. And I can see down at the bottom, the last line that has data represents about 2,400 records. And also, again, working with the data set in the past, I know that this is really what I was expecting when I was wanting data from this reporting cycle and this reporting range. So that right there gives you just a broad sense that I've got about what I was expecting. The next step is to make sure all the way at the top of your data set that you've got proper headers for your columns. This is really important as these headers become a primary point of reference in the pivot tables when you're adding or removing or sorting, constructing your pivot table elements. So I can see in column 1, this looks to be appropriate. I've got headers for the child ID, birth date, child age, etc. all the way, and I'm just going to go all the way across to the end to the last column. You want to make sure, ideally, that none of those headers are blank so that you've got a clear and distinct reference point for each of your columns. Next, it's a good idea to use a filter option to make sure that you've got the right values in each of the columns that you were expecting. And one easy way you can do this is to click on one of the headers at the top, go up to Sort and Filter, and click on Filter, and you'll see that these little drop-down arrows were added across the board. And I'm going to, for example, inspect one of the child outcomes ratings fields. So I've got the entry rating for the social emotional outcome here, and I'm going to click on that menu, and I can see down toward the bottom, I've got a list of values that range from 1 to 7. Now this represents what I know to be all of the valid options for child outcomes entry ratings. And another thing that we want to make sure, assuming that you expect this to be true, and in most cases it is, that you don't have any blank fields. If you end up with blank fields, those usually represent missing data. And if you were not expecting those, you might want to go back to your record of truth or database of truth to make sure that it's producing what you want. Another example might be when I'm looking at the number of days in EI services. So if I come over here, I can see that these numbers range from about 180 days all the way to about 1,090 days. And this is typically what we expect for any given reporting cycle for the child outcomes indicator. The next thing to watch out for is that you don't have any breaks in your rows or columns. We don't want any entirely blank rows or columns because that's going to cause problems with your pivot tables. Typically, the pivot table, when you first set it up, will stop referencing the data past the first entirely blank row or column. And an easy way to do that, assuming you have a manageable sized data set, you could start scanning in the columns from left to right. And I can see, just at a quick scan, I can see there are no columns that are entirely blank. And I can scan the rows as well. Now, especially if you have large data sets with many records, scanning visually like this is not always feasible, and we're going to show you in an upcoming video how you might inspect for this. But just to get started, wanted to make the point that we're looking for data sets that have no breaks across the board. Another trick to getting pivot tables to play nice is to format your data as a table. To get started, go ahead and click anywhere in the range of data that you intend to use. And under the Home tab, go over to the Style submenu and click Format as Table. Now you can choose any of these canned styles. I'm partial to the blue style at the top, so I'm going to click that one. And this window here is essentially going to ask you to confirm the correct data range. Where is the data for your table? Now Excel will usually default to the correct range, assuming you have no breaks in your data, as we discussed earlier. But it's always a good idea to go over to the far right of your data first to make sure it's picking up the right range of columns, which it is. And you can see there's that green dashed line that confirms the data range visually. And if you scroll all the way to the bottom, you can see that it's also picking up the correct number of rows. So that's good. Also, you typically want to make sure that the box is checked that says My Table Has Headers. Now, at this point in the process, we've already confirmed this, and you can see by default it's catching the correct headers, and that's why we mentioned earlier that it's always a good idea to make sure the first row in your data has the proper header names and formatting associated with it. So let's go ahead and click OK. And you can see Excel immediately transformed the data for us. I do want to note that formatting your data as a table is not required in order for pivot tables to work correctly, but this does offer numerous benefits. Number one, it helps you with quality assurance to know that the pivot table is referencing the right range of data because you've named that range already. Otherwise, what would happen is without formatting your data as a table and defining that range up front, you would have to scan the specific rows and columns for quality assurance every time you want to create a new pivot table. Number two, you can see that step already added filters for us. So you can skip the separate step from earlier that we mentioned to add filters. You can just go straight to formatting it as a table. And you can see those drop-down menus appeared automatically. Number three, formatting your data as a table makes it easy to scan each row rather than having to perhaps highlight individual rows. Number four, if you ever create a dashboard, which we're going to cover later in this video series, the charts will automatically refresh if you ever need to edit the source data. So that's a benefit. And lastly, there's an extra step you can take to make things even easier for you. If you go up to the Table Design tab over toward the left and look under Table Name, let's go ahead and rename our table to something like source data. In this case, the entire range of data matches the meaning that we've already associated with the tab itself. But this will give you an easy visual reference when you go to add new pivot tables, rather than having to remember, okay, what was table 1 or what was table 2 exactly? And there you have it. We're now ready to start building our first pivot table. Now, these steps might not catch every little scenario and quirk that you might encounter along the way with pivot tables, but it should cover the majority of the more common issues that tend to get in the way. So please join us in the next video where we will move toward the really fun part, which is starting to build those pivot tables.